So we are open to everybody now.
Stiles. Dr. Stiles currently serves as the Director of Office of Independent Living Programs. Many of us know her. She was formerly the Advocacy Director at the Idaho Protection and Advocacy Agency and a Vocational Rehabilitation Specialist at the Rehabilitation Service Administration in the U.S. Department of Education. In her current role, she is responsible for managing the Centers for Independent Living Services program. Together, these programs and fund states and community-based organizations to support community-based living of people with disabilities. Dr. Stiles earned her PhD in May of 2018 from the University of Idaho after defending her dissertation, Second Life Virtual World Case Studies Exploring Self-Determination of Adults with Developmental Disability. When she is not working, Dr. Stiles will hit the open road and explore the USA on her 2016 Harley Davidson. She has ridden over 60,000 miles through 36 states since 2016. Carol Doback joined the Rehabilitation Service Administration in November 2000 and is the agency's acting Deputy Commissioner. She also serves as the Director of RSA's State Monitoring and Program Improvement Division, a role she has occupied since February 2017. Prior to her current positions, Ms. Doback served as the Chief of the Vocational Rehabilitation Program Unit and the Program Specialist responsible for RSA's advocacy programs. Ms. Doback is a member of the Maryland Bar and holds a JD from the University of Maryland School of Law. David Gardino is the Associate Director, Division Director for the Secondary Transition and Post-Secondary Team within the Research to Practice Division of OSEP. The Secondary Team and Post-Secondary Team administers discretionary grants, cooperative agreements, and contracts that directly support federally established priorities and initiatives designed to initiate, expand, and improve current practice and close the research to practice gap related to the provisions of transition services and post-secondary opportunities for youth with disabilities. David received his PhD in special education from the University of Oregon and holds a master's degree in education counseling. And our last speaker is Lisa Browski. She is a youth employment coordinator at the Ability Center. Lisa is a lifelong resident of Northwest Ohio, growing up on a farm in Perrysburg Township. She is a 2008 graduate of Bowling Green State University, where she earned a bachelor's degree in education. After substitute teaching, post-grad, and impatiently waiting for a permanent position to come along, she transitioned into the customer service field for several years. In 2014, Lisa began working for a local behavioral health agency and right away knew this was the industry in which she wanted to work. For 4 years, Lisa provided job development services to individuals with disabilities, assisting them with seeking, obtaining, and maintaining employment. Lisa is proud to be part of the Ability Center and contributes towards its mission. I am going to go ahead and pass it to Karina, who will be the first speaker.
All right, thank you, Kimberly, very much. And thank you to all of you for joining us today for the session, Pathways to Partnership. This session is going to be all about partnering for students and youth with disabilities to improve job opportunities. As Kimberly mentioned, my name is Karina Stiles, and I'm the Director of the Office of Independent Living Programs at the Administration for Community Living. And I'm joined today by my federal colleagues, Carol Doback and David Guardino, and Lisa Brosky from the Ability Center and from the great state of Ohio. Carol will be sharing some information from the Federal Vocational Rehabilitation Partner side. David will be sharing helpful information today about our partners at the special education, and Lisa will share with you her experiences with building partnerships in Ohio and share some details about some of the great work that's happening there around youth in transition because of those partnerships. So it's likely no surprise to anyone in the audience today that youth with disabilities are disproportionately disadvantaged when it comes to competitive integrated employment. Despite improvements to systems and services over the years, more can be done to help improve job opportunities for youth with disabilities. In today's presentation, Pathways to Partnership will give you an overview of the federal partnership between the Administration for Community Living and the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services at the Department of Education. Our partnership on the federal level models the change we want to see at the local level. Next slide, please. Oh, the one just before this one. There we go. All right, this slide reads Pathways to Partnership, partnering for students and youth with disabilities to improve job opportunities. And what we have here are 3 rings that are leading into each other in a vertical way. At the top, it's titled the VR Agency, and at the local level, the VR Agency transfers into the Rehabilitation Services Administration on the federal level. The next ring at the local level is the SIL, which at the federal level transfers into the Administration for Community Living. And below that ring, we have special education at the local level. And at the federal level, that's the Office of Special Education Programs. So what we're hoping to do is take our roles and responsibilities at the federal level and provide a really good solid model at the state and local level to do a lot of this work that needs to be done to ensure competitive integrated employment outcomes for youth with disabilities. So our effort is really to bring together the great work by Centers for Independent Living, local VR agencies, and local education agencies in such a way that each partner has the opportunity to bring their strengths to the table and collectively support one another's work to achieve successful, competitive, integrated employment outcomes for youth with disabilities. As we launch this effort, and you'll hear a little bit more about this when David talks to you in a minute, we knew that reaching out to our networks early and often were going to be the key to success. In July, we held a webinar that highlighted successful partnerships in a few states. Earlier this month, we held a facilitated discussion with stakeholders. And over the next few months, we'll be doing presentations just like this one that lets us share the details about this initiative with each respective partner network, as well as hopefully create some energy out there in the network so that people will start working on this themselves at the local level. Long term, we'll be producing what we hope will be some really helpful products and providing guidance to each of the respective networks so that we can be consistent and helpful in recognizing each partner's strengths and areas of need. So because the April conference is a conference with the IL network in mind, I do want to take a step back for a minute and talk about the VR agency as it relates to the IL network. In the IL network, there are really 2 big identities associated with the VR agencies, right? You have one with VR as the state's designated state entity, or DSE, for the Independent Living Services Program, what some of you refer to as the Part B program. And in this role, the VR agency acts on behalf of the state to receive, account for, and disperse funds received from the Independent Living Services Program. It is important to note that not every state has a VR agency as its DSE. The other role of the VR agency is as a service provider, and VR agencies provide a wealth of services across the country with a focus on helping people with disabilities achieve successful employment outcomes. So why do I bring this up? Because today our focus will be on the VR agency as an employment service provider, not in the VR role as DSE. And this focus on VR as an employment partner outside of whatever that dynamic might be with the VR agency as a DSE is really important. It's important because all of us have a role to play in ensuring that youth with disabilities have the support, services, and resources they need to successfully transition to their post-secondary life. At the federal level, we are moving forward the initiative, Pathways to Partnership, and you're going to be hearing that over and over and over again, at least for the next year, if not longer. because Pathways to Partnership is all about creating better pathways to partnerships, not just at the federal level, but at the local level as well. And we hope that by doing all of this, that we will have life-changing impacts at the local level and improve competitive integrated employment for youth with disabilities. So these partnerships will recognize that across independent living, vocational rehabilitation, and special education, there are many critical services and supports, and many overlapping services and supports. And we know that it's easier and more sustainable to work when we have stable housing, reliable transportation, access to care, and peer support. And SILs play a critical role in the work because SILs provide these services and supports and connections every day. Our data showed that last year, as a result of SIL services, nearly 12,000 vocational goals were met by SIL consumers. The data also showed that the provision of youth transition services by SILs has increased by 35% since 2016. So the SILs are already doing the work. Vocational rehabilitation agencies are already doing the work. Local education agencies are already doing the work. But are we doing the work together? And that's where we think that we can provide some enhancements and some guidance at the local level to help everybody do this work together. Because we want to break down the silos and we want to work across agencies. And we just want to take every step that we can take that leads youth with disabilities to see a whole lot of success around competitive integrated employment. So for now, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Carol Doback, who will talk with you a little bit about the Vocational Rehabilitation Partnership.
Okay. Thank you, Karina, and I'm very glad to be here with everyone to share with you some information about the Vocational Rehabilitation Program, then the opportunities that exist through the program to develop relationships with Centers for Independent Living and Special Education so that, as Karina pointed out, we can work together to help individuals with disabilities maximize their employment, particularly in competitive integrated employment. But before I go into some details about the VR program and the changes to that program made as the result of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, I want to assure all of you that in many states, there have been long-standing partnerships between vocational rehabilitation agencies and Centers for Independent Living. And that is for one primary reason that I think all of us can agree on, and which is that it is essential that individuals with disabilities have strong independent living skills, and that these independent living skills are critical to their ability to attain, maintain, and advance in employment. If the individual cannot independently function in their home and in the community, they can't pursue activities such as employment and be successful at them. So in recognition of this, I want to point out that many of the services that have been long been available through the VR program are by their very nature independent living services. These services can include training in the use of transportation and rehabilitation technology, travel training, as well as self-advocacy and skills building. Those are just a few of the types of services that I think would fall into the category of independent living services and are listed as well as VR services, thus again pointing out the overlap in the types of services that are available through our respective programs. And VR agencies have developed relationships with Centers for Independent Living to deliver these services. It is these services that it is essential for VR counselors and individuals with disabilities to consider when developing each individualized plan for employment. That identifies not only the individual's employment goal in competitive integrated employment, but also the types of services that are needed to achieve that goal and the providers of those services. And many VR agencies recognize that centers for independent living are best suited to provide the types of services as well as others I've just mentioned. And again, that has led to some long-lasting relationships in a number of states. So what has changed in the VR program that provides further opportunities for collaboration between vocational rehabilitation, centers for independent living, and as well with their colleagues in special education in the states? WIOA made a number of changes that emphasize the fact that individuals with disabilities are capable of achieving competitive integrated employment when provided the necessary services and supports. The amendments to the Act made by WIOA created a statutory definition of competitive integrated employment, the details of which would long exhaust any time that we have in this session. But in order to support this more expansive view of the capacity of individuals to achieve competitive integrated employment, amendments to the Act expanded the types of services that are available, particularly to students with disabilities, as they pursue employment through the VR program. And I'm going to talk about two specific amendments that were made to the Act, which you may have heard of already. And these changes, again, set the stage for further and strengthened collaboration amongst all three partner programs: vocational rehabilitation, special education, and centers for independent living. The first of these changes that I'll speak to you about is the requirement that VR agencies now spend at least 15% of their federal vocational rehabilitation funding on pre-employment transition services for students with disabilities, and that they must do so in coordination with local educational agencies in the states. So what are pre-employment transition services? Well, those services that are provided as a result of this construct directly to students with disabilities include 5 distinct types of services. Those are job exploration and counseling, counseling on opportunities for post-secondary education, work-based learning experiences, job readiness training, and here I want you to listen to this, job readiness training, including social and independent living skills. So there you hear mentioned, direct mention of independent living within the types of services available as pre-employment transition services to students with disabilities. And the 5th type of service that's available is described as something, again, all of you are very familiar with through your work, and that is self-advocacy training and peer mentoring. So I've mentioned that these services are available to students with disabilities, but what's key to understand here is that the changes made to the Act allow VR agencies to provide pre-employment transition services not only to students with disabilities who are eligible for the VR program, but also to students with disabilities who are described as potentially eligible. And what this means is that VR agencies now can provide pre-employment transition services to students with disabilities before those students have even applied for and been determined eligible for the VR program. And what this has done has greatly expanded the number of students with disabilities who our VR agencies are now working with. And it is for this reason, as well as the specific types of services that come within the category of pre-employment transition services, that VR agencies are now more frequently reaching out to their partners in the network of centers for independent living in their states to help them meet the needs of students with disabilities for pre-employment transition services. VR agencies recognize that they can't meet the needs of all students with disabilities in their state, including those who might be potentially eligible, without engaging with colleagues in other organizations and leveraging those partnership opportunities. So in the state plans that we've recently approved for VR agencies and their partners in the workforce development system, their WIOA state plans, we have learned an awful lot about how VR agencies are working with centers for independent living and special education providers to make sure that the needs for pre-employment transition services are being met for students with disabilities in their state. And we're very excited to see the expansion of those partnerships. Another category or another specific change that was made to the Rehabilitation Act by WIOA has been the inclusion of what we refer to in shorthand as Section 511. Section 511 of the Rehabilitation Act places limitations on the ability of individuals with disabilities to be paid some minimum wage until they have made connections with VR programs in their states in order that they can at least consider and explore opportunities for competitive integrated employment before entering into sub-minimum wage employment. And for youth, what that means is that the youth must receive transition services under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, or pre-employment transition services under the VR program. Again, a mention of pre-employment transition services and all that entails that I've just spoken with you about. And then once those services are delivered or in conjunction with those services, the youth with the disability must apply for VR services and then either be determined for VR services or ineligible for VR services before that individual can then pursue sub-minimum wage employment. For youth who are determined eligible, they must develop an individualized plan for employment, again, with the goal of competitive integrated employment. And it is in this part of the service delivery process for these youth that, again, we would see the need to address independent living skills through services that I've spoken about earlier in my remarks related to those long-standing VR services that have been available to address the independent living needs of VR consumers. And then finally, the youth with disabilities who if they've either been determined ineligible for VR services or who have been unsuccessful after pursuing employment through an individualized plan for employment, these individuals must receive career counseling services and information and referral services geared toward competitive integrated employment. And VR agencies have found opportunities when working with Centers for Independent Living in delivering these career counseling and information and referral services as well. So I think we can see just with these two significant changes to the VR program as a result of WIOA, there are more expansive and additional opportunities for VR agencies, special education, and centers for independent living to work together to ensure that students with disabilities in particular have every opportunity possible to pursue and explore competitive integrated employment and then be successful at achieving that employment. And so with that, I'm now going to turn over the presentation to David Gordina, who will talk with you some more about our federal partnership activities and the role of special education in these partnerships at the state level. So David.
Thank you, Carol. Good morning or good afternoon, depending where you're at in the country. It's great to be here representing the Office of Special Education Programs, or OSEP, with my colleagues from RSA and ACL. You know, in preparing for this morning, I realized a couple of things. One, I haven't worn a tie in over 7 months. And two, I haven't actually done a presentation in the same amount of time. With the travel restrictions, those opportunities just haven't come up. So it's great to be here today. If I'm not as smooth as my colleagues who previously spoke, you'll understand why. But prior to coming to the Office of Special Education Programs, I was at the State Department of Education in Oregon. And that experience really provided me with the perspective of what it's like working in states and the challenge of creating and maintaining these kinds of relationships. We know how difficult it is here at the federal level, but that's mirrored at the local level. But what I want to say today, and hopefully in modeling with our colleagues here, that it can be done. And through that collaboration, we can achieve greater results. I don't think anyone in special education would argue that we're happy with the results we're getting currently around graduation or dropout or reading or math performance on the NAEP for students with disabilities. We've come a long way, but we've got a long way to go. And so we are here to talk today about special education's role in this partnership. And we know and understand that across the country, there are great partnerships between special education at the state and district level, as well as with their partners in VR. What's more rare is that you would see a strong partnership across all three. And so we're here today modeling and asking you to follow suit around a partnership that includes special education, VR, and independent living. And some of the things that we've done when we talk about transition services under IDEA, we're talking about a coordinated set of activities designed to be with a results-oriented process that's focused on improving academic and functional achievement for the child with a disability, and looking for that achievement to occur across school and post-school activities. That can include instruction-related services, community experiences, development of employment or other post-school adult living objectives, and if appropriate, acquisition of daily living skills and the provision of functional vocational evaluation. And so, like Carol explained, the opportunities are immense for the overlap of those services and the smooth transition for youth, students and youth who are receiving services under IDEA, VR, and then independent living. So within OSERS, which is made up of OSEP and RSA, we're fortunate. We have a transition steering committee, which is made up of staff from both offices. And we meet regularly, and we develop guidance documents, FAQs. Most recently, we revised the transition guide this August, which really spells out the allowable activities under IDEA and VR, and identifies resources and examples. So I'd encourage you to go Google OSERS transition activities is where you could find that guide, and it's very helpful. So collaboration doesn't happen by accident necessarily. It takes strong leadership and a commitment. And so we are fortunate here at OSERS to have Mark Schultz leading the way, and at ACL, Julie Hawker. And when they got together at a conference, they thought, why aren't we doing more together as organizations and federal agencies? And so they created an opportunity for staff from OSEP, RSA, and ACL to meet regularly. And they set out a vision of a collaboration that wasn't currently occurring at the federal level. So we started meeting regularly last January. And in doing so, we started to talk about that smooth transition that we wanted to see for students and youth. We started to talk about a vision or a roadmap of what those services would look like in that smooth transition handoff that could occur if everyone was at the table and fully understood what each other's work was and where their accountability lies and what their funding allows. And so through that, we decided, you know, as feds, we're very good at looking at the rules and the regulations, the statutes. What we want is to have stakeholder input on the realities of these kinds of collaborations. So we brought together technical assistance providers, practitioners from the states to join us in that conversation of a true vision and collaboration between the three entities. And in doing so, we realized that there are some great examples that we want to share. So last July, we did a webinar, Karina mentioned, around pathways for partnerships that included South Carolina, Minnesota, Michigan, and Illinois. And each of those teams had representation from special education, VR, and IL. And they talked about the challenge of creating and maintaining these relationships. Now, in some of those states, the special education and the VR relationship was much stronger. And in other states, the VR and independent living relationships were stronger. But by having all three entities in the discussions, they started to learn much more about each other's work. And in doing so, they found some connection points. They talked about the importance of having shared goals. Mark Schultz would say, you know, collaboration doesn't occur until there's an actual activity that you are working on together. And that's what these kinds of conversations really started to facilitate. And this webinar really expressed. I would encourage you to go and look at that webinar. And you can see it on the OSER's VR 100, where we're celebrating 100 years of VR. It's posted there. So beyond the webinar, we decided to further highlight some of the work going on in South Carolina. Some of the things South Carolina is doing with their independent living, or ABLE South Carolina as it's called, they've provided and contracted with the Department of Education to provide technical assistance on self-determination, disability rights, and employment skills to students in districts and district staff. The Department of Education also contracted with ABLE South Carolina to provide COVID programming. So they did a self-paced online courses where things like self-advocacy, work readiness, and online peer mentoring could occur. And so those partnerships are very strong. ABLE South Carolina and South Carolina VR developed a shared data collection tool. Once you realize your missions are similar, your goals are similar, the data you actually would look at is very similar. So they are sharing data with their interagency agreement. And then I think lastly, what we learned with those states is that independently, the funding could be seen as inadequate. But when you leverage that funding together and you're performing those activities together, you can stretch those resources tremendously. Following the webinar with the states that I just talked about, we held a facilitated conversation between national organizations that are involved in this work. And so we brought together folks from the National Association of State Directors of Special Education, NASD, which is the Special Education Directors. We brought together the National Council on Independent Living, or NICL folks, the Council of State Administrators of Vocational Rehabilitation, or CSAVR, and lastly, you folks with the Association of Programs for Rural Independent Living, or APRIL. I have to admit, engaged in this work has really increased my understanding of ACL and independent living. I spent the majority of my career focused on K-12 special education. So by virtue of doing this work and being involved in the conversations, it's really helped me understand the world of independent living in ways I didn't understand it before. And so, but I'll admit, you know, when folks first mentioned APRIL, I thought that was a colleague I had yet to meet, and didn't really put it together that in fact there's a national organization out here doing this great work. So it's great to be here. that conversation among those national organizations was really helpful, I think, for us as well as them, to really, again, identify those shared visions and goals, and talk about some of the challenges with the way their power structures are set up or their funding is determined and distributed, and the message they're actually trying to get to their constituents. One of the things some of the bright spots we learned is that, NASD and CSAVR have adopted strategic plans together and are collaborating on meeting shared goals as national organizations. NASD has a seat at the Perkins Act Advisory Committee, so we're partnering with our career and technical programs. April's developing mentoring relationships with state level organizations and TA centers. And so again, I think reaching out, fostering that collaborative work, again, has to be around something. It can't just be a conversation. Those are good starters and relationships need to be built, but the true collaboration occurs when you're working together on an actual project. So we'll continue to do this work. We'll continue to look for opportunities to share where states are excelling in these three-way collaboration between special education, VR, and independent living. We want to model, and again, having been at the state level, I always appreciated when the feds actually modeled what collaboration could look like at that level, and it really sent the message that we too could do it at the state level. So we will be presenting at the CSAVR panel in November, and we'll continue to look for opportunities throughout the remainder of this year and next. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa to talk about the great work and the partnerships that are occurring in Ohio.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, everyone. As they said, I am Lisa Brodsky, the Youth Employment Coordinator at the Ability Center, and we are located in Sylvania, Ohio, which is near Toledo, so Northwest Ohio. Next slide, please. So just very briefly, I just want to touch on what we do as an agency. I know that everyone from ASIL has a similar mission, but at the Ability Center, our mission is to advocate, educate, partner, and provide services supporting people with disabilities to thrive within their community. Next slide, please.
Just really quick, there is an image on the screen with a individual in a wheelchair. It looks like at some kind of sporting event with a service animal.
Thank you. So we serve 7 counties in Northwest Ohio. That includes Defiance, Fulton, Henry, Lucas, Ottawa, Williams, and Wood counties. And some of our programs extend beyond that, but our core services are served just in those 7 counties. Next slide, please. So with the 6 core services, we have several programs which include community living, and with that we have a home accessibility program, assistive technology and medical equipment. We have an assistance dog program where we train service therapy and school therapy dogs. We have an advocacy department which focuses on healthcare, transportation, public access, and housing advocacy. A youth in transition, which is the department that I am in and what we'll be talking about mostly today. We provide independent living and employment classes, develop independent living plans, and individual goals. And then lastly, we have an information and referral program where we provide just information to those in the disability community. We have a lot of really knowledgeable people that work here and are able to provide resources to individuals who need that. Next slide, please.
And then there's just an image on the screen of 2 individuals in wheelchairs chatting, with one with a service animal and one individual standing with a cup of coffee.
Thank you. So our youth department, again, like I said, that is the department that I am in, and we do a lot of things that a lot of great things, but specifically that partner with our state vocational rehabilitation agency, which in Ohio is called Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities, as well as local schools and special education departments and school staff, teachers, and special ed directors. The Ability Center has a long history with Voc Rehab or OOD. Years and years ago, we did the Pathways program, which was a partnership with OOD and schools that provided a lot of great service. And then most recently, we participated in the pre-employment transition services, which Carol mentioned, and they're wonderful programs. I think that with SILS having a smaller staff typically than a lot of other, especially state agencies, it can sometimes be difficult to meet the parameters of that program. So sometimes after starting a program, we have to really take a look and see, are we able to realistically serve our consumers in the best way with the parameters of that program. But our executive director here is very, very passionate about getting people with disabilities jobs. It's one of his biggest passions, and that's why I was very excited to come to the Ability Center, because that is the industry in which I worked before. So I'm passionate about it too. So I'm glad to be here doing this type of work. So I'm going to talk about 3 major projects or programs that we have that work with OOD specifically, and then also local schools and special ed departments. And I think that since I've been here, we've realized that it's important to have open lines of communication between our local OOD office and really educate them on what we do as a Center for Independent Living. And I had some background working with OOD prior in my previous position, so I really understood the parameters of what they do as well. But I think while Voc Rehab and SILS have a lot of, we have common goals by helping our consumers become more independent, and employment is such a big key role in that. But we do different things, and we have different capabilities and different areas of expertise. So I think collaborating together and educating each other was really important. So something that we started doing in the time that I've been here is presenting to our local OOD office and the Voc Rehab counselors. And I think that helped tremendously in getting their support and understanding each other a little more, so they knew when it was appropriate to refer to us for our programs, and we knew when it was more appropriate to refer to them for their programs. And usually we are working together. All of my consumers on my caseload have employment goals, and I would always encourage everyone that is actively seeking employment, even if they are working with me on some of those goals, I always encourage them to also work with OOD, because I do think it's critical. And then as well as OOD, we also work closely with the schools, and we've been doing that for a long time as well. There have been grants over the years that we have allowed us to be a little more involved in certain areas. But in the last couple of years, we've really tried to develop some solid relationships with special ed directors and special ed teachers to let them know that we're supporting our consumers, but we're also supporting them. Because of the different services that we provide here, we're able to provide resources to the schools and the teachers as well, which I think they appreciate. So the programs that I'm going to speak about are our Next Step Summer Program, Youth Leadership Forum, and then our participation in the multi-agency planning MAP team. So next slide, please.
There's just an image of a young boy in a wheelchair. Seems like he's laughing outside.
Thank you. So our Next Step summer program is something that we're really proud of. It's an initiative to prepare high school students with disabilities for the next phase of life, so that in a lot of cases is some type of post-secondary education, but we really focus on independent living skills. So the way the program works is individuals live on campus of the University of Toledo for 5 weeks, and they not only are they living in the dorms with their peers, but they're also placed at a local job site and have paid work experience, and that placement is based on their employment interests and their skills. In the evenings, we do a lot of independent living skills. They do their own laundry, they do their own cooking. We focus on time management, a lot of critical skills that are important in employment, but then also in independent living. And it's a component of a larger program that we have here, but I wanted to focus on Next Steps because OOD has a similar summer youth program. It's an employment program where they have a 5-week work experience as well. So ours is mirrored kind of to reflect a summer youth program that OOD provides as a way to encourage people consumers to do both, to understand that they can have the employment experience and also the independent living experience at the same time. And next slide, please.
There's 2 individuals sitting at a table. Looks like they're writing on a paper.
Thank you. So we collaborate with OOD in this, as they will refer to us some of their consumers who are already summer youth eligible, who are participating in their summer youth program, but they realize that they want to take it to that extra level and really have that independent living experience as well. So they would refer individuals to us, so they're able to complete or participate in both at the same time. And then on the flip side of that, we also will refer to them if we come across a consumer who is interested in our program for the independent living piece, and then they're already going to be participating in an employment experience through our program anyway. If we feel that they would be a good candidate for OOD, we would refer them to OOD as well. So it's really kind of a 2-way referral process, which took a little while to get there. I think back to the education piece and really just explaining to them what our program is and how it can further assist their consumers in reaching their employment goals. And again, it's the setup is designed to be similar to their summer youth program. That way, ideally the time frame and the dates would go hand in hand, and they can participate in both. And just really briefly, some of the skills and topics, I kind of touched on these already, but employment readiness, budgeting, money management, campus and dorm safety, time management, meal preparation, socialization and recreation, responsibility, laundry, housekeeping, among many other things. It's just really kind of an all-inclusive program as far as independent living skills. And next slide, please.
And there's an individual sitting at a desk with red glasses and talking on the phone.
Thank you. Next, I wanted to touch on the Youth Leadership Forum. This was something new that we did this summer. So OOD previously had a statewide Youth Leadership Forum, which was a wonderful program, and it was held for anyone in the state of Ohio that met the criteria, and it would be held in Columbus. And while that program was very successful, they decided that it might be a good idea to regionalize. So it expanded this year to 5 regions, so include Toledo, Columbus, Dayton, Cleveland, and Canton. And OSILC was the agency that received that grant, and then they subcontracted to other SILs in each of those regions to facilitate the Youth Leadership Forum. So this was an interesting year to start a new program that was intended to be in person, but we did we persevered, and in July we held the forum completely virtually. And one thing that was really important for Youth Leadership Forum was our connection and our partnership with OOD. The counselors would refer to us for individuals who they felt were appropriate. And then they were also elected a liaison to be on our steering committee, which was a huge help as well. And this is just a screenshot on the screen here of one of our Zoom calls from this summer. And next slide, please. I'll just briefly touch on that. Thank you. And the last way that we partner with OOD and schools is the multi-agency planning or MAP team. And this is just an ongoing effort sponsored by the Ohio Employment First Task Force to improve community integrated employment for youth with disabilities. So OOD and local schools, as well as many other agencies, are part of this team. And we meet monthly to talk about how we can better support individuals and reaching their employment goals. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Lisa. If we could go to the next slide, please. All right, so we are almost at time, and I will let Kimberly jump in just a second, but I want to leave everyone today with a challenge, and the slide on the screen is that challenge. You'll see that it looks similar to the first slide that we posted, where it shows vertically in rings the VR agency connected to the SIL, connected to special education, and looping back around again to go up the circle chain. That is really intended to show everyone that these three agencies and entities are so tightly connected in this effort that they need one another, and we need each other in order to accomplish this work. So the challenge for each of you is to go out into your communities and connect with your partners and get to know each other. Take that first step and set up a meeting. And even in this virtual environment, maybe that looks like giving your partner at the VR agency or special education agency a call and saying, hey, let's get into a Zoom call and sit with our coffee and talk about what each other does and look at beginning to create this partnership. There's no one way to do this. There, fortunately, are many ways that you can do this and be successful. But again, the challenge is just to get started, take that first step. We have a Q&A planned for this session. However, we are almost at time. I see that there are 11 questions in the Q&A. I will let Kimberly or someone from April jump in, but I'm wondering if there might be an opportunity for the panel members to answer the questions in the Q&A offline and maybe post some written responses to where this session is housed on the April site. I would need someone from April or Kimberly to jump on and let me know if that's possible.
Yeah, we can do that. Why don't we cover a few questions, maybe 2 questions, and we can answer them by typing or providing email follow-up. So the first question that we have is from Disability Link. And the question is, how does RSA help vocational rehabilitation agencies understand the functions of SILs? In my experience, I've had an amazing experience in some states, but as new state directors come on, there seems to be a real breakdown to understanding.
Okay, Kim, this is Carol. Would you like me to answer that now briefly? And perhaps we can expand upon it in writing, but.
Yeah, Carol, if you could answer it, that'd be great.
Sure. Sure, and we truly appreciate that question. And I know this also, you heard David speak about the facilitated conversation that the national membership organizations had several weeks ago. We all understand that there is turnover in our agencies, whether it's in their leadership and also among staff who are key to carrying out the daily work of the collaborations and partnerships. And that is why it's important for us at the federal level to speak in presentations such as this, and continue our other activities. Karina mentioned the tools that we'll be providing as we move forward in our initiative at the federal level. That should be helpful to everyone at the state level, whether in independent living, special education, or VR. So that they can sustain their relationships better. But I think a good deal of this work has to take place at the state level, and it's to set up perhaps more formal mechanisms memorializing these relationships, whether they be through memoranda of understanding or other vehicles of that type, so that new leadership and staff come in, there is something that can be pointed to that this is the relationship we have. And this is what we intend to do through this relationship. And these are the results and objectives we have for our work together. Those types of formal mechanisms, which may be seen as somewhat labor intensive initially, really can serve a purpose moving forward for the sustainability of the relationships.
Thank you, Carol. And we are now out of time, but what the panelists will do is we will stay after and we will be answering these questions in the Q&A box. So we will be typing the answers in. For all panelists, please remember your feedback is so important to April. Please make sure to complete the survey. The survey link is in the chat box. Thank you all. Thank you, panelists. This was a wonderful session, and thank you for everyone who was able to attend. Have a great one.
Yep, and everybody can check back to the conference website, and that's where you'll find the answers to the Q&A. Thank you all for joining.